If you were anything like me or just thinking, why? I see water come down from the sky, it ends up in my bathtub. What's the big deal? Then you got a home here. Welcome to the Go Show, celebrating all things outdoors in this beautiful outdoor playground of a state, nation, and world that we live in. Water is important, y'all. I've been talking about this over and over again, not just because on the real estate exam 20 years ago, riparian was the only thing I got right. I understand being in a desert and the crucial nature of water. So joining us from Arizona State University, Sarah Porter. She is all things water. You are our guru, whether you like it or not. You are going to be our water guru, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to get an overview today, if we could. Like, just if you could just basic for me, how does it fall from the sky and end up in my bathtub? It could be just any state, Arizona, pick it, whatever. Just how does it get from the sky to my tub?
Well, Mike, thank you for having me. I love talking about water, and I think I especially love talking about kind of the basics of water. So here, let's just start with this. Arizona is an arid state for the most part, and the water that we use generally is not water that just fell from the sky onto our roofs or onto our cities. Most of our water is imported from different places, some in state, some out of state, or most of our water. But there is a hydrologic cycle, and it's important to remember that water is constantly moving in different states. It may be in the form of, ambient moisture. It may be in the form of liquid water. It may be an iceberg. And water constantly, because it's always kind of on the move, much of the work in an arid city like Phoenix or an arid state like Arizona is sort of trying to prevent it from what it wants to do, and that might be evaporate or not precipitate here. So essentially move water to where it's needed and then hold that water where we need it for when we need it.
And how do we do that here in Arizona? Yeah. So let's say it's everybody talks about snowpack and Flagstaff, and they want, does the water run down? And you say we're importing from other states. Oh my goodness, I have a ton of questions.
Well, there are 4 main sources of water in the state of Arizona, and where you live really determines how much of what source you're using. But the 4 main sources are water from the Colorado River, and about 80% of that water originates from snowpack in the upper Rockies in Wyoming and Colorado and Utah. Of course, the Colorado flows across the northwestern corner of the state and winds up defining the border between Arizona and California, but it doesn't flow to Phoenix and it doesn't flow to Tucson. Arizona built a big canal that moves that water from near Lake Havasu across the state, takes a turn, goes from Phoenix to Tucson. That's about 35% of the water supply for the whole state.
Okay.
And it's a big supply for the Phoenix to Tucson area. It's also the only supply for the communities along the western border of the state, like Yuma, right along the river. Another significant supply, about equal to Colorado River water, is groundwater. So that's water that's in the porous spaces between the particles that are underground. Now, unlike river water, which essentially renews every time there's a snowy winter and the snow melts and makes its way into the river as a flow, groundwater is a non-renewing source of water supply in Arizona. And that's because we don't get a lot of precipitation. Only a tiny percent of the water that falls on the ground in rain actually makes its way down to the aquifers for recharge. In fact, I have it on good authority from the Department of Water Resources that is something like 2% of the water that falls on the ground makes it into the aquifers as recharge. Some of the precipitation is snowpack that turns into flows in rivers and streams in the north and east part of the state, but our aquifers in central Arizona are not being recharged by annual rain. In fact, the water in the aquifers under Arizona was put down there. It percolated down there 20 to 25,000 years ago at the end of the last glacial maximum. So this is fossil groundwater. And we have technology. We're really good at pumping it out faster than nature replenishes it. We have two other sources of water supply in the state, and that is one is in-state surface water, and that would be rivers that are, within the control of Arizona, not like the Colorado River, which is shared with 6 other states and Mexico. The Salt and the Verde rivers, managed by SRP, are the biggest sources of in-state surface water. And there, for the Phoenix area, there's something like 30% of the water supply. They're a really important water supply. And then finally, we have reclaimed water. And that's water that was put into the wastewater treatment system and then is treated fit for reuse. Statewide, reclaimed water is about 5% of the water that's used to supply demand. In the greater Phoenix area, it's more like 12%, because Phoenix is a big city, generates a lot of wastewater. Cities and other entities treat that water fit for reuse.
Okay,
So that's the basic, I think.
No, I love this. It's fantastic. I'm taking notes. I'm so excited. I get to share this later with everyone. But Sarah Porter's joining us. She is our water guru in Arizona State University. And what is the center? I apologize, Sarah.
Yeah,
I didn't.
It's the Kyle Center for Water Policy. It is named for Senator John Kyle. Senator Kyle was a water lawyer and then went to Congress and then became a senator. And while he was in Congress and the Senate, he was pretty active on Western water issues. It's a good idea for Arizona to have a water knowledgeable person in the delegation because water is so important, and the federal partnerships and federal role is also, has been really critical to Arizona's being as water resilient as it is.
And again, it's not sexy from a political standpoint. We don't get into politics on the show, but from a political standpoint, you can't run on, I'm the water guy. Hey, vote for me. I'm the water guy. You have to have all these other salacious and hot topic issues that seem to be more driven to drive votes. Water doesn't. But I see these 4 ways that Arizona's getting water. And I think that's amazing. I think as maybe a small business owner, like I have 4 revenue streams, it seems like we're in pretty darn good shape. But I don't hear that we are in good shape. So I'm going to ask you this question, have you help me out here. Mm-hmm. The state of Arizona water is what?
Well, I would say we're at an inflection point. How's that for a wishy-washy answer?
I like it.
So, and it relates to each of those sources of supply. It all goes back to these sources of supply. And I should add, each of those different sources of supply has its own set of laws and regulations related to how it's managed, whether it can be transferred, what you can do with it. And also each water provider, if it's your city, if it's a private company, water company, if it's a domestic water improvement district, each water provider is responsible for obtaining and maintaining their water portfolio. So there can be big differences, from 2 cities next door to each other in terms of whether they're water resilient and how they're doing. But if we go back to those 4 sources of supply, in short, there are big challenges on the Colorado River. For various reasons, the 7 states, 29 sovereign Native American tribes, all need to come to an agreement to use less water from the river. We can get into the reasons why, but basically what we're seeing is persistent declines in the reservoirs that hold Colorado River water for California, Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico. And we've got to leave more water in the system to prevent a catastrophic decline. So that's tough, very hard work. Groundwater is problematic because in many parts of the state, there is no limitation on the use of groundwater. And some parts of the state have become very attractive for industrial scale agriculture. And that agriculture needs so much water to do farming on these big scales that they're depleting the aquifers. And so there's a risk for people who were there before, little communities, other farms, that their non-renewing supply will be used up. That is not the case in the bigger cities, Phoenix to Tucson, even Prescott. We have groundwater management that prevents that.
Okay.
The other two sources of supply are looking good. The SRP system is not as susceptible to the kinds of challenges that we're seeing on the Colorado River, and it's easier to manage. It has a locally elected board that can, adapt to changing conditions. It always has. I expect it will continue. Doesn't mean we won't have years of, where we need to be careful and then years of plenty, but we have a reservoir system that's very functional for SRP. And then reclaimed water is kind of a growing, increasingly important supply of water, because as cities grow and as technology improves, we have more and more capacity to reuse water, to the extent that now, just really beginning this year, the state and cities are taking steps to reclaim water, to reclaim effluent by treating it all the way up to drinking water standards. So that's kind of a lot. Sorry for all the long answers, but
I want it all.
That's how
Feed
we're
us.
doing with water. So, our two really biggest supplies of water, groundwater and Colorado River water, we're seeing new challenges, new pressures.
Okay.
And I'll add one more thing, and that is groundwater is the backup supply for the cities when Colorado River water is shorted, when there's a shortage. And so as we're adjusting to these challenges related to groundwater and Colorado River water, we're seeing new proposals or pressure on groundwater supplies where groundwater has been carefully regulated, carefully managed, the cities. And some of those proposals could be a good thing, and some of them could lead to a kind of loss of water resilience for the people who live in these areas, and it's about 85% of Arizonans. So it really it matters that when we make changes to how we manage groundwater in the places where we've been doing it, that we need to think, are these changes going to result in depleting the supplies of water that we've been counting on as our backup supply?
Okay. Then so again, most people would say that again, I turn on my faucet, water comes out.
Yeah.
I look at it, live on a golf course. I see that all the time. Like, wait, man, we got water. I don't know why everybody's so freaked out. And then you go out to maybe out west, and you're like, oh, there's another giant master plan community that's coming up. Oh, there's another.
The
Oh,
West
my
Valley.
goodness.
Yeah.
So you think, well, do I think I mean, again, I turned the water on this morning and washing my hands, brushed my teeth. Everything was good. We got water for those guys too, right? And that's what I think is a concern for, especially us as conservationists, both urban sprawl and getting into native habitats and how that impacts the conservation efforts in the state. Again, we're the most biodiverse non-coastal state in the nation. So it's important for us to keep an eye on these things and really keep an ear to the ground, so to speak, on water. Can we sustain as Arizona? Can we sustain this massive master plan community here, master plan community there? Can we sustain that?
With very good investments and careful decision making, we can. Okay. But of course, there are lots of folks who resist those investments and decision making. And so it winds up being, a difficult issue. So we have these places in the state where in 1980, the state imposed groundwater management. And really, this isn't just groundwater management, it's management of water supplies for sustainable growth. And in these areas, so this is Phoenix, the Pinal County area, Tucson, and Prescott. Very recently, in the southeastern part of the state, people voted in, and then in one instance, the Department of Water Resources created 2 more brand new of these areas, active management areas. And all that growth that you're talking about is primarily occurring in the Phoenix active management area, though some of it is, in the Pinal, and some of it is in Tucson, a little bit in Prescott. Most of that growth is in active management areas. In these areas, there is a rule under our groundwater laws that says you can't build a new subdivision of 6 or more lots for sale, meaning master plan community unless you first demonstrate 100-year supply of water, and that the water the use of the water is consistent with the management plan for this area. And this kind of complicated description of regulations means that we have pushed growth on renewable supplies of water. When growth is on groundwater, the people who use the groundwater are actually paying what is kind of like a property tax to replenish the groundwater they use. So there's an agency that has to go out and get the water and replenish groundwater equal to what those groundwater reliant new subdivisions are using. So we can, it's not that hard to, it's expensive and it is hard, but it's feasible to add water to be used for urban growth. And the way our laws currently work, that's kind of forced. We're kind of at the point where that is what has to happen. Of course, that isn't the preference of the industries that want to do that growth. I mean, and so there's pressure to ease up on these rules. And they can make some arguments that there's room to ease up on these rules without putting everyone at risk. But that's really where we are right now. Okay. And then we get into bigger questions of sustainability, like where is the new water going to come from? What will the impacts of that water be on the place from which the water is removed? What are the disturbances that will occur to convey that water? And those are, it really is going to depend on what water supply we're talking about. One more thing, and that is that where you're growing is the whole question. So in most of the greater Phoenix area, same with Tucson, the kind of bigger, older communities, they have water in their portfolio to accommodate a lot of growth. But that growth is going to be denser and denser, right? The land values are so high, that growth is going to be vertical. Higher density is good for water management. It means that more and more of the water that's used is being put back into the system rather than spread out over people's lawns and pools. And so it means that water can be reclaimed. It's less water use per acre. A new subdivision out in the far West Valley on previously undeveloped desert, let's say, that is all new water demand. And that is more challenging for growth than, growth in an older city.
Okay. But okay, so let's talk about the challenge then. Because I did pay attention. I did even take notes. We got the Colorado River. We have
so that's we have parts of town that don't have access to a renewable supply of water. All of the growth in Buckeye, for example, all of the growth in Queen Creek, that growth has been on groundwater under this replenishment program where, all of the groundwater that they use has to be replenished by some new supply. And we're at the point where our Department of Water Resources has said, we're at the limits. There are actually several limits now on that kind of groundwater-based growth. And so that potentially could push more vertical, higher density growth that winds up being less water per capita, less water per acre, a more water sustainable form of growth. Or we could have inroads into this complex system of water management and basically have more of that kind of outward, growth in those peripheral parts of Phoenix that winds up effectively reducing everybody's water security. Alternatively, those entities that, developers and others, and the city of Buckeye, the mayor of Buckeye likes to say Buckeye's the next Phoenix,
I know.
They could get it together and go develop a new water supply. And there are some opportunities for new water supply, but that's a lot more expensive and time consuming than the old program. Then
But hold on. Wait, develop a new water supply. Now
yeah,
tell me how
that's
in the that sounds magical. That
that's
sounds
our
something out of
parlance.
Harry Potter. Like I'm just gonna wave a
Yeah,
wand
yeah,
and develop a new water supply. How do
yeah.
you do that? What are you talking about when you say that?
Well, so there are a few different ideas for new water supply. Some are actually underway. So one is enlarging one of the dams on the Verde River, Bartlett Dam. SRP is working with a group of 22 different stakeholders, mostly cities, to look at making the dam bigger. And this would accomplish a lot of objectives, but one big objective would be that SRP would rarely have to release water from the rivers as it has in recent years when we've actually had a flowing salt river through the city of Phoenix. So enlarging Bartlett means less water is being lost through those releases, and that new water in the system would be available as a new water supply. Or it might be a really important supply to backfill the parts of the valley that rely on Colorado River if there's a shortage of Colorado River. Another thing SRP is doing that seems to me really, really smart is that they've done studies and they found that when there's a big, we have these super wet years and then we have strings of not so wet years. But when we have these really wet years, these are like once every 9 or 10 years, inevitably the reservoir levels go so high that water's in a part of the dam called, believe it or not, the dam safety space. And under dam regulations, that water has to be taken off the dam, released from the dam within a very short time, just in case we have another big rain event.
Yeah.
And SRP has done lots and lots of studies with the federal regulators and concluded that it is risk neutral to lengthen the time that SRP can hold that water in the dam safety space, because we don't have those kinds of events. And I guess if we did, they could release it. And if they have more time, they can take that water off and put it in aquifers. So just lengthening their time to about 90 or 100 days from 20 days means that they can capture all that extra water instead of, again, releasing it. Those are very accessible projects to get more water. I can think of 3 more.
Okay. I want to ask you about one. I don't know if it's on your list, but this is what we hear from politicians, so you can't really trust most of it. So you just say, "Oh, desalination." Everybody's gonna. Well, look, we got these oceans. Let's just put a big straw in those suckers and filter it out, and away we go. Is that a pipe dream? Is that just political speak, or is that really a viable option in case our 4 sources go kaput?
Yeah. I would say my answer to that is never say never to anything. We don't know. I can't predict the future. Is it going to be the water supply that makes sense to develop next? No. And I'll give you a few reasons why. Problem 1, we don't have a coastline. That means we need a friend with a coastline. Who do you want? Who do you pick? California or Mexico?
Yeah.
California has trouble building a desal plant for itself. They do have a couple, but it is a hugely difficult, heavy lift in California. Okay, so let's turn to Mexico. It's very hard to imagine a scenario in which there could be diplomatic strife between Mexico and Arizona. Very, very hard, impossible to imagine, or Mexico and the United States, very difficult to imagine a time in which the leaders of both countries might not be seeing eye to eye on every single thing. But it is the case that if we became reliant on a water supply from Mexico, we would be putting a water supply into play as a political or diplomatic football. This is the case in other parts of the world. What we do is the entity that has the water supply becomes the water hegemon and can use the water to extract other types of concessions. So that's a risk that we need to think about. One solution to that risk would be to build a desal plant in Mexico at the expense of Arizona water users. And Arizona water users would then take an exchange of Mexico's Colorado River water, while Mexican water users would have the benefit of the desal plant. that concept also has a benefit of not having to run a pipe north, pumping water hundreds of miles, to users in Arizona. So that might work.
Okay.
Regardless, that water is going to be incredibly expensive. The San Diego County Water Authority bought a whole lot of desalinated ocean water when the Carlsbad plant was completed. They basically entered into a contract to buy, most of that desalinated ocean water over the long term. And that their projections, that water is currently selling for over $3,000 an acre foot. An acre foot is about as much water as 3.5 households, single family homes, will use in a year. It's about 326,000 gallons. So that's well over twice the cost of treating an acre foot of surface water, of an acre foot of drinking water. Some treatment is like $500 for an acre foot of drinking water, depending on what the water supply was. So it's already super expensive. They're projecting that the cost of that water is going to go up to over $7,000 an acre foot in the next 15 years. So maybe that, I could see desalinated ocean water being a part of a water portfolio. There are benefits to it. It's a drought-proof supply. You might want it to be 10, 15% of your municipal water portfolio, because it would give you that added buffer of water, resilience. But you don't want it to be probably your only water supply, because it's so darn expensive.
Yeah.
And before anyone's going to be willing to spend the money on that super expensive water supply, we need to make full use of the available cheaper supplies, like the Bartlett expansion, like the Roosevelt storage modification. There are 3 groundwater basins near the West Valley from which the transportation of raw groundwater is allowed. Otherwise, that's not allowed throughout the state. Those, that would probably result in cheaper water than ocean desal. There are entities on the main stem of the Colorado River that could, if they wanted, they could lease some of their Colorado River water, which could be run through the CAP. We already have that infrastructure. That would probably be cheaper than desal. There are a lot of solutions short of desalinated ocean water.
And then, so what do we need to panic right now? Are we in panic mode? Yeah.
No.
No.
No. I mean, I think we don't need to panic. And
we
the
should be
reason
conscious,
why,
but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I hope we can talk about conservation too, and what kind of conservation makes sense and why we should conserve. But I'll just say, I think we need to protect groundwater that cities have made huge investments in. And it's really important. So we have we kind of have haves and have nots. We have places in Arizona, the active management areas, where cities have made massive investments and made plans. We have 100-year planning requirements. It's very disruptive to change that. It undoes the investments that have been made over the decades. And it basically reduces the water security for millions of Arizonans. I worry a lot that in the interest of serving a short-term need, and we have needs like more housing, we could do something that would have profoundly bad consequences in the long run, like undoing this whole regime that we've had for making investments in land, investments in homes be, safe investments from a water perspective. So that's one thing. The Colorado River is a really, really imperiled system. It's not going to run dry, but we do have to figure out how to live with less. And that's just the reality. But no, not panic.
Okay. All right. But we do need to just kind of be conscious of conservation and conserving water and maybe not taking the 25-minute shower, and we also need to take
your 25-minute shower is really not so bad, because all that water, depending on whether your water is going into a municipal water treatment system, most of us don't have a septic tank. If you have a septic tank, then conserve don't take that long shower. But if your water, I mean, I'm not advocating that, but it's not as bad
Sarah
as you
said you
think.
could take a half-hour shower if you want.
The occasional bath, the bubble bath, the candles, that water is going to be reclaimed and reused.
Okay.
So the water that you use indoors, other than for cooking and cleaning, is going to be reclaimed and reused.
Okay.
It's your outside water that cannot be reclaimed, right? So being careful with the water that we use outside is really the way to help. If we're conserving water to sort of help, the greater good, then that's what we should do. But for a long time, I wanted to use less water and conserve water because I imagined that water was going to stay in a beautiful natural place. And I would think, well, we need to think about the beautiful places, the beautiful streams and the beautiful wetlands in Arizona. And we know that is critical for wildlife. So I would conserve water for that. And the reality is, because of this system that we have of how our water is imported and impounded in reservoirs, and groundwater is a big supply, my conservation, not a drop of it, not a drop, was resulting in a benefit to habitat.
Okay.
So I think it's also important to make sure that we are conserving for the right reasons. And the main reason to conserve these days, if you live in a place where you're served by a municipal water provider, by a private water company or a city, is that when you use less over the long term, then the provider has an easier time meeting demand with the portfolio that the provider has in hand. That's the big. Doesn't that sound enticing?
It so does. I really don't want to help my water company out to just raise the rates. I really don't want to help them out right now.
And I mean, most of the bigger, older cities do have a reliance on Colorado River water. And so, reducing our per capita reliance on Colorado River water really helps the city meet that challenge of how to make sure that we all have the water we need when Colorado River water is in shortage.
Yeah, basically just treat water like you are when you're out on an extended hunting trip or a camping trip and things like that. You're like, this is how much water we have. Just at least be conscious of it, right?
Yeah. I think so, but I'd say I have different standards of hygiene when I'm on a camping trip than at home.
Yeah, I take a dude wipe and just go to town. We're good.
Exactly. Like, been 6 days and no shower, that's okay. I don't think I want to live that way at home, and we don't have to, fortunately.
Okay.
And we really, it is kind of amazing that that almost all the water that we use indoors is reclaimed and put to a use that mostly benefits us. A lot of that water cools the Palo Verde nuclear power plant. And, that treated effluent is being used to generate electricity for, thousands and thousands and thousands of homes.
That's great.
Cities take reclaimed effluent, treated effluent, and they recharge aquifers with it. So that's a water supply for the future. And cities are getting ready to treat that all the way up to drinking water standards so that it can be redelivered.
I've actually drank beer that was made from reclaimed water. That was the thing for a hot minute there. I don't know if the breweries are still doing that, but wasn't bad. But you got to get over that, like, because when you think reclaimed water, you know what you think of, and so when you think you put that in a delicious IPA, you're thinking, I don't know if I love IPAs that much.
2 sips in, though, it's like, what did they say? What are the ingredients of this beer?
Exactly. Yeah. After your first one, you're not going to care much at all.
Yeah. I've drunk a lot of that that advanced purified water in my career, and I always like to say, like, I'm healthy.
There you go.
You're grown an inch or two taller. Got smarter. It was good for me.
Sarah Porter, thank you so much for our, I would say we even tiptoed into a 202 level, but our basic overview of Arizona, our 101 course for Arizona water, and you've made me feel a ton better. I really do think that, if we're not in panic mode, we're okay, but still be conscious, do what you can, support politicians that are making these decisions that are pro water conservation, and just keep doing the great work you're doing at Arizona State. And please come back. And I have a lot more questions on my list that we can get to. Would you do that for us?
Thank you, Mike. I would love to, and I loved your questions, and thanks for letting me give long, complete answers. I really appreciate
and
it.
It was
You're
easy
great.
for me. I just sat here and took notes. This was fantastic. So thank you, and thank you for hanging out with us. We'll be back tomorrow right here on the Go Show, celebrating all things outdoors in this beautiful outdoor playground of state, nation, and world that